Hi, I'm Adam Culp, and you're at Beachcasts. Today we're going to be talking about surprising problems preventing an upgrade to PHP 7. So stick around and we'll get right on that. Okay, so there's many problems that prevent people from being able to upgrade to PHP 7. Whether they have old code that's been around for a very long time or whether it's relatively recent code, there are typically going to be some problems that prevent folks from being able to just install PHP 7 and move on. Now, these days, if you're not on PHP 7 or one of the versions of PHP 7, meaning 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, you are in an outdated version of PHP. Version 7 is no longer supported. Any version of PHP 5 is no longer supported, so you should be on a newer version of PHP. However, I realize that that can be problematic for some people. That can be problematic for some companies because their legacy code just isn't up to par. So now I'm going to cover in this video some of the key things that I've found through my experience that companies run into that prevent them from moving to PHP 7. Now, keep in mind that sometimes I'm working with code that is 10 or more years old, and these are problems that exist on some of this old code. If somebody has code that is maybe only a couple years old and is preventing them from moving to PHP 7, chances are some of these items are not going to be that. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Now, you want to stick around till the end of the video, because at the end of the video, I'm going to show you how you, through automated ways, can detect some of these and then be able to fix them. But this video is less about that and more about the individual items that I typically find. So to get started with, one of the first things that we notice is PHP 4 style constructors. Now in PHP 5, PHP 4, we kind of had a model, an object model. But in PHP 5.3, we really refined that in PHP, where we started, we had a true constructors and we're able to do that. However, in PHP 4, we did not have that. We did not have constructors. Instead, what we did is we named a function the same name as the class, and PHP just used that as the constructor for that class. So if a function was named the same as the class, it was used as the constructor. However, in PHP 5, that still continued to work, but it would give some warnings. Now in PHP 7, that no longer works. In PHP 7, it causes errors. So we need to update this. Now here's a sample class, and we notice that the class name is myClass. It's extending another class, and then we have the function called myClass. Now, this will cause errors. There's no constructor here, but there is myClass. So one of the things that we run into, in typically what we had to do in these then is we called the parent constructor by calling something like another class, and that was how we called the parent constructor, right? Because the parent constructor also had a function the same name as the class. But again, that doesn't really work these days, so we need to clean this up. So now how I typically modernize these is I rename the function to be construct, but then the thing is the parent class is also going to cause some issues. So that means that we need to modernize that as well. So now if I go over to that parent class, I also have to modernize it. So we modernize it by renaming the function to construct. Back in the class that was extending that, now you see that it's broke, right? Another class is now throwing an error. PHP Storm is letting us know it doesn't exist. So what we have to do is we have to call that parent constructor. Now, of course, I could do something like this and call this construct, but that's actually going to call the constructor that we're already in. What I need to do is I need to make it more proper. Instead, call parent and construct. So now we're actually calling the parent constructor from within the child, and it's properly using it. So that being the case, that's how we would do that. So that is how I typically refactor PHP 4 style constructors, and that's a big problem in some code bases, especially if you're using some pair modules. I know a lot of people aren't using pair these days, but there are still some code bases out there using pair, and it's still an issue. Some of them have been modernized, many of them have not. Another item that we run into quite often is where old code was using the function set magic quotes runtime, set underscore magic underscore quotes underscore runtime, and that was a way in old versions of PHP, that was a way that we could set the magic quotes runtime, so it would automatically quote strings for us and try to do it in a smart manner. It was a mistake to ever create that in PHP, but it was done nonetheless. And now it's been cleaned up. As of PHP 5.3, it's deprecated, and now it's actually removed in PHP 7. So we can no longer use set magic quotes runtime. Now, another thing that you notice here is I have a function called a get magic quotes runtime. That has not been deprecated yet, ironically enough. I don't know why they left that, but anyways, it can still be used. But typically these days it's going to return false because the flag no longer exists in the PHP INI and is no longer being used. So this is another item that we commonly find in legacy code bases. Many times it's just a matter of removing this entirely, removing the usage of it, but that does mean that there might be some major refactoring to accommodate for that, because if a code base was using magic quotes, now we need to do some sort of data validation and escaping in the current code base. That's another item. Something else we run into quite often is the use of the old style super globals, where we would have the longhand, HTTP underscore post underscore vars. And these days, of course, we use underscore post instead. And instead of using the longhand version, and that's that. So we would instead of using the longhand, we would then use this, put it in there, and that's how we modernize that, right? And that could be, you could be using post vars, you could be using get, you could be using server. All of those have been deprecated and are now gone, and they don't work. So we want to make sure we're using the correct shorter versions of those as we move to PHP 7. Another item that I run into quite often is the use of each. Each is a function that allows us to work with arrays of data and be able to get the contents of them. So for instance, here I have an example taking from the php.net website, where we have a variable called foo, and in there we're passing an array, right? And then the bar variable, what we're doing is we're using each on foo to output it, and then when we do a print r of bar, then we can see we get back the array of data where there's a key value pair, and then there's an extra thing called value, and then we have also the key to go along with that. So and again, so the use of each is no longer able to be done. So as another example, maybe we had something like a fruit array, and we have a key value pairs where we have A is equal to apple, B is equal to banana, C is equal to cranberry. So if we reset the fruits array, because of course you want to make sure you're starting at the beginning of the array, and then what folks did with each is they would use list to get the keys and values, and then they would use each to populate that with fruit. And then if we echo that out, we get something like this, where we get A, apple, B, banana, C, cranberry, and it would output that. So that's how folks were using each. Now, as an example, one of the things that we could do in that previous example is we could use for each, right? where we're doing fruit, and then we're outputting that as key values, and then we could echo out the keys and values and get a very similar result to what we just saw up here. It would be exactly the same, but we're echoing that out. So while the data is different with for each, we can still simulate the same thing. Now, another thing that I run into quite often is a more advanced usage where they're using list they're using list and each together, and then of course we can't simply use a for each for that, right? The data is more complex. So in that case, we generally use an if statement where we're pulling the keys, we're assigning current, also assigning next, and then we're able to then use the data that was used through the advanced usage of list and each together. In some data structures, something like this is needed, especially if you're using some sort of templating engine that is parsing out using regular expression and things like that. So just know that each is not always a matter of replacing it with for each. You might actually have to manually go through an array using key, current, and next in order to get the same result that you got previously in the legacy code. Another item that I run into quite often with older code bases is the use of ereg. Ereg was deprecated long ago, but now it's definitely not working. So oftentimes when we're working with legacy code bases, we're seeing this still being used. And of course, sometimes it's easy, right? Sometimes it's just a matter of changing out that ereg with a P, and now we've got preg replace, and it does essentially the same thing, right? So it could be a one-to-one comparison. Now that is not the same with every ereg, the old ereg functions. Some of them you do have to make some changes. Oh, one thing that I do have to do here is using preg replace instead of ereg. By putting in just the word for here, oftentimes it'll give you back an error or a notice, because it's looking for, it wants some sort of delimiter. So you put some sort of delimiter at the beginning and the end, because it is expecting regular expression. And that could be, it could be square brackets, it could be tildes, it could be, whatever you want to use as you're denoting the beginning and the end of the string. And then of course you could run that now and preg, with the delimiters around the word for would then replace the word for with the number 4 as we're telling it to do in this preg replace, and that is replacing ereg. Now along that line, preg replace, which is the Perl regular expression, it does have some gotchas, because there was a modifier available in preg replace that is now no longer available, and that is the /e. So the /e identifier here, that's no longer there anymore. And basically what that did is it acted as a callback that would loop through the pattern and continue to use that comparison. However, the e modifier is no longer there. That callback is no longer there. Instead, what we have now, so instead of doing a preg replace and putting the regular expression with the /e modifier and then calling out to some function, and using the string, instead what we can do now is we can use preg replace callback. Now you'll notice the regular expression is exactly the same except for the e modifier. And then what I've done here is the second argument for that preg replace callback. I've created an anonymous function that is then calling back to that function, and by using that and passing the code, then we're able to get the result of the string, and then it outputs exactly the same result as doing the preg. But again, I'm using an anonymous function there. You can do it through other ways, but anonymous function is the recommended way to do it, simply because that makes it kind of lazy. It's not going to get executed until you execute it, so that makes it work really well, really fast. But the preg replace callback is the replacement for using the e modifier in preg replace. Now, some other things that we've had that are now no longer supported in PHP 7 is something like the mcrypt extension, right? Mcrypt has been deprecated in PHP 7. Now you cannot use it. Now there are some polyfills out there that you can use. If you used mcrypt, a lot in your code base, there are some polyfills out there that allow you to still use it. But please be conscious that mcrypt is not secure in its default state. If you're using some advanced usages of it in some different libraries, it can be made secure, but it hasn't been supported or developed on for a very long time. So just know that you should be doing something to mitigate that, or you might want to use SSL. SSL is the recommended way to substitute the mcrypt usage. But anyway, mcrypt is gone. You need to find another way to compensate for that. Now, the MySQL extension as well has been deprecated. And you'll notice that I'm seeing underscores here in PHP Storm because PHP Storm knows that it's no longer any good. Instead, what we generally do is we just replace that out with a MySQL I. Now we can do our connect, we can do our real escape string, and we can also do our query, and then we can do our fetch assoc as well, just by adding the I to MySQL. Now, one thing to note is that when we're using the MySQL real escape string and also the MySQL I query, we now no longer can just pass in the data, because this is requiring not only the data that we want to escape, but we also need to give it the link for the connection. So in this case, I need to take this connection and put that in as the first argument. And so now MySQL real escape string knows what connection to use to the database, because it's using MySQL to do this escaping, it needs to connect to the database and pass the data and say, okay, how should I escape this? And then MySQL will answer back through the extension and give back the data. And the same thing with MySQL query. We have to do the same thing. It requires the first argument to be the link or the connection to the database, and then the query, of course, goes after that. So I need to add in the connection there as well, and now the MySQL I query will also work. What I found is in a lot of code bases, sometimes that was there, but it was in reverse order, right? The query was first, then the connection was later. So with MySQL that has to be reversed. So sometimes it's a matter of just rearranging the arguments as you're passing them in. Now, please note that I am not doing good things here, right? I have my MySQL query, and I'm then concatenating and using a variable that I use MySQL I real escape string on. This is not the way that I recommend doing this. It is still escaping it, so technically it's safe, but you should be using stored procedures and other methods to make this even more secure. Again, this is just a really light example so I could show you updating the MySQL I extension in the code base. Now, something else that I run into often is the use of improper usage, rather, of switch. So if I look at a switch statement, here we have some code base where I have some data, and this is key value pairs. There's 3 key value pairs in here, and then I have a condition which I'm setting to true. It is just a Boolean flag, and then I'm creating the results. Right now, it's just an empty array at the beginning, and then I have a for each loop here. Inside the for each loop, I'm taking that data, I'm looping over it to get the keys and values, and then I have a switch statement that is taking advantage of the keys, and then based on that, it is repopulating a result array with the keys and values. Now, what I want to call to your attention here, and what becomes an issue many times, is we actually see folks using continue inside these cases. Now, just know that continue, it does nothing inside the switch statements. Often what folks are trying to do is use continue and say, okay, now just continue through the looping, so continue to the next loop. And continue in this case, rather than continuing, they're trying to use continue to continue the code, but not necessarily to execute the next loop. Continue does nothing more than act as a break. It should not be used in a switch statement. You should be using break in a switch statement, not continue. Continue is not supposed to be there. Continue is great for loops. It's great for using inside some places that it's designed for, but it's not designed to be used inside a switch statement. So please don't use it there, even though there is a for each loop surrounding it. Another thing that we run into is folks might be expecting break to do something different. So if I go through this switch statement, and in this switch statement, if I execute this, now let me go ahead and execute this the way that it is, right? So first I'm going to do PHP, and I'm going to call switch.php. And when I do that, we see that I get back, of course, I'm echoing out 1, 2, 3. And you can see here in the cases, I'm echoing 1, echoing 2, and then further down, I'm echoing 3 when it gets to that test case, or when it gets to that case. And then I'm outputting the key and value as well at the end of it. But you'll notice that number 2, I'm getting back 1, I'm getting back 3, but I'm not getting back 2. And the reason is because I have this if condition here with that continue. And so that just shows you that continue acts as a break. That's what it's supposed to do. Now, if I wanted to do actually put a break there, then it would work the way it's intended, right? It would work exactly the same way, it's doing exactly the same thing. But what if I wanted it to do something else, right? What if I want that break, if this condition is met, don't do the loop ever again, right? Stop the for each loop. Don't just stop the switch statement, which I think is what most people are trying to do in this case. So if I come in here and change break to be break 2, now we can see that it goes through test case 1, but test case 2, because I get the 2, it's actually killing it execution. It's not continuing to the next iteration in the for each loop. This is what I think most people in the legacy code are attempting by using continue. So you need to use something like a break 2 in order to have that happen. And break 2 says don't break just the current construct, which is the switch statement, but also break the loop surrounding it. So go up 2 levels and stop things at that level. So that is so that's what we often run into with those, is where improper usage of continue, and also maybe not even using break quite the way it was meant to. So the last thing that I typically run into is the use of split. The use of split is now deprecated. Split doesn't work anymore. So we have to use preg split instead. Now in this case, let's say I have string, right? I have a string, and in there I'm just putting the word string, and then I'm using split. I'm putting in the pattern to say break on every single character, or every single character, every single thing in that and of the string, and then I'm outputting the characters using print r. So if I execute that, we see oh well, first of all, it's not working because split is deprecated. Of course, I'm running PHP 7. So what I actually need to do there is do preg split just like this, and then I can execute that with preg split to do what we would expect, and sure enough, it works. I didn't have to change any other code here. All I had to do is put preg underscore on the beginning of split, and now it's doing what we would expect it to do. It's outputting the result that we were expecting. Now be advised that if your split in your legacy code was doing something more, then you might need to investigate that. But typically, just adding preg underscore to the beginning of it pretty much solves the issue. So those are the things that I typically run into. Those are the top surprising things that often prevent people from upgrading to PHP 7. Now, how can you find these things? How can you go out and find these things to be able to fix them? And to do that, you would want to go out to Docker Hub, do a search for me, Adam Culp, at Docker Hub. I have an image on Docker Hub that is called PHP Code Quality. And in there, I have PHP compatibility. The PHP compatibility is a set of sniffs that you can use in conjunction with PHP Code Sniffer. And by using that, There is code there freely available. Just copy and paste the snippet of how to execute it via the command line, and you can run it. It runs within a Docker container, and it will output a file to tell you the items that you need to change in order to modernize to PHP 7. So there you go. There's your tip on how to automate this and be able to find some of these things on your own. So I wish you the best of luck with that. If you like this video, please like the video down below. Also, remember to subscribe to Beachcasts. If you're not subscribed to Beachcasts, tell your friends about Beachcasts and have them check us out. And also, leave a comment below. If you have found other things that you've had to modernize, or if you've found different ways to modernize things than what I've shared in this video, because there are more ways to skin a cat, and there are many more examples. I just showed some of the common ones that I run into. By no means is this an exhaustive list. There's a lot more things that are out in legacy code that prevent people from going to PHP 7. These are just the most common that I find, the most common 10 things that I find. So I wish you the best of luck. Please leave comments, like us, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you.